I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. Hello, everyone, and happy Friday. We made it to the weekend. Shout out to everyone in the chat. Shout out to everyone watching on Rockfin as well. And welcome to Sab's podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. I have a very special guest today. Her name is Kim Iversen. She is the host of the Kim Iversen Show and Rising. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This is exciting. I loved your intro. That was so cool.
Thanks so much. Shout out to Roar Media because they created that for me.
Oh, that's so cool. Really cool.
So thanks so much for coming on. I really want to get information about your background. Like, why did you decide to do independent media? Like what brought you over to this space?
Well, I had been a radio talk show host for over a decade, doing a nightly radio show that was actually syndicated across the country on the FM dial. It was heard on what we call hot AC stations in radio. So that's like, it's not a CHR is like what you hear Ryan Seacrest on, and hot AC is something that plays a mixture of, like the hottest song plus, some of the like John Mayer, will kind of be on there. Like Lady Gaga and John Mayer will kind of make it. I don't even know who the big artists are today anymore because I'm so out of it. I don't know who's like real popular. But I was doing a radio talk show for many years, and then I decided I wanted to leave radio in particular because I just didn't know where that industry's headed. It's kind of one of those sort of going the way of newspaper, print newspaper. And so I decided that I didn't want to renew my contract with my company. They were very shocked by that. They were like, "What? You're leaving?" And I was like, I'm leaving. I don't want to do this anymore. I want to go do something else. And so I took some time off. I traveled. I wasn't really sure. I started getting really engaged in politics just in my spare time. I was just, that's right when Donald Trump won. So it was, I left the show. So Trump won the election in November, and I left December 31st from my radio show. So it was right at, before Trump actually took office. So of course, when Trump took office, everybody was super hyper political. And I was, of course, like everybody, really, fascinated, angry. I was very angry with Trump winning. I cried the night he won. I was really upset. And I was like your average CNN watcher, I would say. I watched a lot of CNN, a lot of MSNBC at the time. And I was very, I started to get really, really interested and wanting so I started really diving in and just researching on my own, just kind of one of my hobbies is research. I know it's a dumb hobby, but it's what I like it. I like to research, whether I'm using it for work or not, So as I dug in more, I noticed that there was a lot of inconsistencies in the media, that they would say something, and then when I would look at the whole story, it was false. What they were saying was essentially false. So this started to really bother me. And so I started looking for work inside of politics, trying to figure out how I could kind of get myself in there. And I found a company where I would write a newsletter, a daily newsletter for them. And then we did that for a while, but it was a very left, I'd say establishment, Democrat, Hillary Clinton-esque outlet. Mm-hmm. And again, the more I was researching and getting into it, the more I found myself totally disagreeing with the people that I was working with. And that obviously became really problematic. And so I had to go, and I didn't know what I was going to do, but I just knew that wasn't going to work out, and that I was just way too anti-establishment for them. And so my dad, who was a big viewer of Jimmy Dore, my dad is like one of Jimmy Dore's probably first 1,000 subscribers, I swear to you. He
Wow.
was following Jimmy in the early days. He also had been following, he was a big watcher of Jamal Thomas from Progressive Soapbox. He was also one of Jamal's very early viewers. Big fan also of Nico House. He, but he's like, Nico talks a lot, but Nico's a friend. So he would watch Nico, so he was really into all that. So he would say, you've got to, listen to these people and you need to do what they're doing. You need to get out there and do what, get out there and start on this, enlighten people about the reality of what's going on. And so, yeah, I decided to do it. I said, okay. And so one day I launched a YouTube channel, and I didn't have, I had, I think, 18 subscribers from just friends and family.
Mm-hmm.
And I started making videos. And my very first video was during the government shutdown. And of 2019, January of 2019, there was a government shutdown that was like looming, or maybe we were in the middle of it. And I did a video on the history of government shutdowns and how they really work and why they're really happening. And it turns out they don't need to happen at all. It's just total political posturing. They're totally they could just eradicate them tomorrow if they wanted to. And they're a fairly new political tool. And so I did that. And then, people really liked that and said, yeah, wow, you should do more of these. And I was surprised at the number, how that video was circulated around, even just on Facebook. And so I just did more and more, and my channel grew really fast. And, I started growing really, really fast on YouTube. In 2019, the channel grew, I think 200 or 250,000 subscribers in that first year.
Wow.
So it was really big. And then the pandemic hit, and my channel was severely halted by YouTube. They put the kibosh on me. They said, I wasn't allowed to grow a single subscriber. I went from 15 to 20,000 subs a month to suddenly nothing, zero, not one. Like that's not normal, right? So they wouldn't let me grow at all. And instead they actually started bleeding my channel of subscribers. They started making me lose them. Yeah. So that happened for a long time. And it's still kind of in that, it's got a warning on, my channel has a warning on it. So I'm not, I'm not allowed to, they don't suggest my videos to anyone or anything like that. So it finally did hit 300,000 the other day, but it's been a slow, long, drawn out, to get to that from the first year, So so then I've just been doing the independent thing.
Awesome. So I know I saw you on Franco's show. This was recently after a couple of channels from MCSC were demonetized by YouTube. I think all of them were hit the same day, the same time, something like that.
Yeah, February 2nd or 3rd of this year, actually, there was a big YouTube. They wiped out a couple of dozen progressive channels, mostly progressives. There were a couple of that were conservative, but most of them were progressive. And the issue was that they were all talking about, we didn't know why. So YouTube didn't ever say why, but it became clear that what they all had in common was that they were talking about the January 6th in the event that happened at the Capitol. And so even if they didn't, like Jamal Thomas, for example, on Progressive Soapbox, he got demonetized completely, even though he was very against what happened. And he was saying, this is crazy. And, so it didn't matter what your stance was. It just seemed if you were even open to the dialogue of hearing from someone, because I think what Jamal did was he had someone on his show to discuss it. And even though Jamal's stance was super anti what happened and, very much, but his guest, I believe, was no, this is what's going on. And there was, whatever the takes were. So YouTube just cracked down and pretty much got rid of anybody and everybody that even was open to having the conversation about election fraud or the January 6th, anything like that.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's crazy.
One of the questions I had about that, though, because one thing I did notice that didn't seem to happen to some of the channels that I would say are on the corporate algorithm. That didn't seem to happen to TYT. Right. It didn't seem to happen to, and I wanted to get your opinion on that. Why do you think that they weren't penalized for doing the same thing that Franco
Yeah.
and Jamal did.
Yeah, they get away with a lot more. So like, as you know, I've been on the Hill, and so now I'm affiliated with them. I'm still independent, so I'm not an employee of their company, and I could part ways at any time, and they can cut ties with me tomorrow if they felt like it. But yeah, they're all of the brands that are considered actual news organizations. They're totally protected from the algorithms. So they actually are assigned a person, and that person helps them, if they do have a demonetized video, they just call that person at YouTube. So they actually have an I can't call anybody at YouTube. I don't have anybody there that I can talk. I mean, I have to just go through the stupid, like if something's demonetized, I have to hit it and say, request review and then hope that, and then, and there's no like actual process of this. You just have to hope that person, whoever reviews it, says, okay, green light. Right. So they do have an actual person that they're able to talk to on a regular, and that they do talk to on a regular basis. And yeah, they're just, it's just like why CNN and Fox or any of them can have a discussion about it, even though, they all kind of went in there was none of this was all bad. They have one narrative that they all have to follow along with, but they're allowed to at least talk about it. And it's the same, even with, I think, TYT and Hill and these other outlets, I do think they probably still have to toe the line on the narrative, though. I'm not sure. I don't know, but I would just assume that they have to, maybe they can have a guest that questions it, but that's like as far as that can go. I don't
That
know
makes
though.
sense. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm curious because like you were probably, especially back during that time, I think you were the only female host on the left that I saw that had their own show. And what I mean by that is other women that I saw on the left as commentators, they were usually paired with a guy. So
Yeah.
like Crystal was with Sagar
Right.
and so forth. And but
Right.
you were by yourself. And I felt like that was really like telling to me. And I was curious to hear because I have noticed that there seems to be women commentators on the left seem to be heavily attacked more. I've
Yeah.
noticed this happens more with like Brianna Joy Gray and also with Fee from Convo Couch. And I'm
Yeah.
curious to hear like what has your experience been? Do you feel that you are attacked more often than maybe men who may say the same thing in the same space?
I don't think about it, but I'm
Mhm.
sure it's true. Yeah. I mean, I don't think about it, but I've had others think about that for me. And they say it's true that I don't seem to get away with nearly as much as someone else, as a male can say. So if I say it, then I'm immediately criticized or scrutinized or misinterpreted. But if they say it, that it's okay. But I haven't found it to be hindering for me at all. So that's why I don't think about it, because I think by and large, audiences, they don't think that way and they don't participate in that. And so if there are people that want to give me extra criticism, and maybe it's subconscious and they don't realize that they're criticizing me more because I'm a woman, they're so inconsequential to me that I don't see any point in even thinking about it, if that
That's a
makes
good
sense.
point.
Yeah.
That's a good point. No, I've noticed a lot of it on Twitter, of course, obviously. There are times when I feel like I need to take a Twitter break
Yeah.
because of it.
I
And I
mean, it's
think as
very
far as
possible, that like when I look at counterparts and how big their channels have been able to grow, I mean, sure, it's
mhm,
possible that my channel would have grown bigger had I been a guy, right? Maybe it
mhm.
would have been double, maybe it's hard to say. So that's why it's like so hard to even think about when it comes to any of those sort of factors that are against us in our lives. Um, it's just so hard to even to make a claim of, well, it was because of, this other non relevant factor really that causes people to turn away from me or not like me or not want to really listen to me, or they don't want to take me seriously or whatever it might be, right? I think it's so hard to gauge that, so I just find it's best in life to ignore it and to just do our best and keep grinding away and not think about that.
That's a good point. How did you end up on Rising? Was this something that you always wanted to do, or did they approach you and you thought about it and said, "I can do this in my show as well"?
No, I never wanted to do I did not want to do it. I actually I was a big critic of Crystal and Sagar, not of them, but I would say I was a big critic of Rising. Es- And and this actually kind of follows into why I ended up going and being on it, was because when they came on the scene as an independent creator, I found them heavily threatening to independent creators, right? Because you've got this establishment media company coming in and into the YouTube space, which is at that point dominated by independent media. And even though TYT had kind of gone sort of corporate, they at least started off like truly independent, right? And they built their success, and then they took the money in, and then things, changed or whatever. But nonetheless, they're still in that indie zone. And then Rising comes along, looks really indie. Everybody starts to take to it and think. And what I really hated was that all of these other creators were like fawning over it. Like, oh, my gosh, like, oh, they're so great. Look at this independent, show coming in. And I was like, that's not independent. That's corporate media. And by the way, this is a mayday for everybody in independent media, because what we're now seeing is the infiltration of establishment media into the independent media space, looking like independent media, fooling the audiences. I had so many fights with my dad about this. My dad being a big watcher, as I mentioned, of indie media and particularly progressive media. And he was the guy that would make his coffee every morning and sit there and watch Rising without fail every morning, right? And I would get mad at him, and I'd say, you realize that you are ushering in the end, the demise of independent media, because every other media company will catch a clue from The Hill, and they will create a show just like this, similar. They'll realize that they can't pump in their actual cable network show onto YouTube and make that work. It won't. And so what they'll do is they'll create these other shows. And from what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, if you know, but I think Majority Report, isn't that one MSNBC with Sam Cedar?
Peacock, NBC.
No, Sam Cedar's Majority Report show on YouTube, I believe, is MSNBC paid for.
Oh my God. Well, that makes sense, because he was a contributor for.
Right. I think that is that's their YouTube independent media show. Right. So I could be wrong. I'm pretty sure that's true. So to me, I was like, guys, mayday. Like these shows are growing big. They're getting these audiences. They're being promoted in the suggested video feed. We're not being promoted anymore. And instead, it's these establishment media companies that are pretending to be independent. And this is where we're at. So to me, it was, I was very critical of it. Still am to a degree, but I also think it's beyond that point now. And now it's almost like the writing's on the wall, and those of us who are independent we have to face the music now. And so that music YouTube is getting rid of us. That's the way it's going. They're getting rid of us. So we either have to move to another platform, which a lot of us have, a lot of us have moved to Rockfin, right? There's Rumble. I know a lot of, I'm starting to make a channel on Rumble. I haven't gotten started on it yet, but I think I might, throw some stuff over there, because I guess people are going there too, right? There's like a variety of places now where people are having to move. And I think that's where we're going to have to go. But the question is, will they monetize in the same way? Because a lot of us are reliant on this income to live, right? This has been our source of income.
Yeah.
So it's either, move and hope and keep your fingers crossed that the YouTube money will kind of like transition to these other platforms. Or you got to join them, right? It's like, if you can't beat them, join them. And so I sort of took I can't beat them, so I'm going to try to join them. As long as they don't censor me, I'll do it for as long as I'm allowed to actually say what I want to say. And so I reached out to them myself, actually, when I saw that they were having like these rotating cast of hosts going on. And I was like, like they're clearly playing musical chairs over there. And I was like, so this would be interesting. I just want to try. All I wanted was to guest on there. I was like, I just want to guest co-host for a day, since you're, or a week or whatever, since you guys are having these like musical chairs of guests. And because I came from radio, I thought, well, this would be interesting. I've never done television. So I want to see how it really works. And this would be a good space to do it in. So I reached out to them. They got back to me right away, really. And they were like, would you be willing to move to DC? Would you be willing to potentially have the job full time? And I was like, I wasn't even thinking about that, but I would be willing to think about that. And I actually struggled thinking about that. I had to really think about that. I was really like, oh man, what did I get myself into? Like, what if they do offer me a job? Like, would I take that job? Like, I don't know. I like my independence. At the same time, I don't know where we're headed. there's a lot of upside, right? Because they aren't defeated by the algorithm. So videos can go viral. Like I've had a couple go viral on their channel, like 1.4 million, 2 different radars. So, but I just figured I'd cross that bridge when I got there. So I just started going ahead and guest hosting, which turned into more full-time hosting. And so yeah, but and I have to say, they have never, ever, ever censored me. They have never told me what I cannot say, even when, Ryan Grimm and I kind of get into it on the show. There is never a discussion afterward of like lay off or can you not talk about that? There's never any insinuation of, oh gosh, that's going to really upset Ryan today. If you so don't like none of that, those discussions never happen. If anything, the only thing that they did say to me one time was, you can double down on that. They're like, yeah, double down, don't back off. Go ahead. So I think they kind of thought maybe that's good TV. People seem to like that.
Now, have you
That's it.
ever lived on the East Coast before?
I have. Yeah, I lived in New York City when I was in my very, very, very early radio career. I lived in New York, and then otherwise, I've lived in the Midwest. I've lived in Indiana and Illinois, and I've lived in Texas, but that's it. So I've only been to DC twice, but I don't think I'm moving. I think we're working out an arrangement to where I'm not moving, and I'm staying in LA, and I won't have to wake up at 3:00 in the morning, which is what I was doing hosting the show. Yeah, I was waking up at 3 because the first meeting is 6:15 East Coast time, which is 3:15 my time. So I had to wake up at 3 to make that meeting, and then we get all of our show notes, and we get we can get ready while we review our notes, and then we've got to be in our chairs and filming at what is 4:45 my time.
My God.
Yeah. So it's been a real beast. So that has been exhausting. I've done that for 2 months. That has been exhausting. And so we've now come up with a new arrangement for me where instead of me just like quitting, right, the show and saying, I can't do it. Like it's too early, guys. I cannot wake up at 3 a.m. The compromise now, what we're doing is I will do a daily radar, and I will do one segment in addition, but I will not be a regular host. So I'll be like this kind of, quasi host that comes in at the end of the show. So that way I can wake up at 6:00 and be ready for filming by 7. And so I'll film the radar which is 10:00 your guys' time. So my radar will come out like an hour after the other 2 radars come out.
Okay.
So it'll be a little later in the show, but that'll come out later. Plus my like other little special segment discussion with the hosts and whatever, or guests, or however they want to do that. And then we're still kind of working it out, but it's going to be 2 segments a day on the show because they do 8, and so I'll be on 2 of the 8. But one of them being a radar, which is a big. That's the big one. That's the one you want, right? Because that's the one that everybody watches.
Yep.
So.
No, it's true. I know some people watch the show to see you. They watch to only see you, Kim.
Yeah, so we'll see how it goes, right? So that's the plan, is that I will only be on for 2 of the 8 segments. But if it turns out that, yeah, there's like an exodus of the views because of the fans being, then there might be, then we might have to modify, and I might have to start waking up early again.
Oh my gosh. I want to get your opinion about the recall in California, because this has been getting a lot of attention. When I heard the choices were, Gavin Newsom and Larry Elder, and I heard there were other like Green Party candidates running as well.
There were a lot of candidates, 40,
Yeah.
45. Yeah.
And so the media like focused on those 2. And I knew a little bit about Gavin Newsom. I knew about his history with Nancy Pelosi. I knew a lot about Larry Elder, and I thought to myself, like, oh my God, people in California are screwed either way.
Yeah.
I've heard things about the recall election. I've seen videos of people in California saying that they showed up to vote. There were Republicans, they showed up to vote, and they were told that they already voted and they didn't vote yet. I want to get like your opinion about how you feel the recall election went. And for people who don't know, why did this all happen to begin with?
So the media, so, we've got a big problem in our country right now. Our biggest problem is the media. The media is completely in the pocket of the Democratic Party. So, and that's creating a scenario like North Korea, where, in North Korea, there's supposedly these free and fair elections, right? So Kim Jong-un says, no, they go to the poll, they vote, everybody votes in North Korea. But the problem is that they're given, they are given a couple of choices. So they do have other candidates, but all of the propaganda from the media is Kim Jong-un is the one. Kim Jong-un, this is your dear leader. This is the one that you want. Like this other guy, not so good. This guy, this is, so they're basically given, they're brainwashed through their media, through the propaganda, through their education to only support their dear leader. And so when they go to the polls, they vote. And funny enough, 98, 99% of them vote for Kim Jong-un, right? Like magic. So, and then, we call it out and we say, oh my gosh, that's not a real free and fair election. And then the North Koreans come out and say, yes, it was, they voted. So you can vote, you can have a democracy-ish, right? Where you vote, people cast a vote. But the bottom line is, if they've been brainwashed into a one narrative nation, if they've been told by the media over and over and over, this bad, this misinformation, this fake news, this, everything they want to sling at this side, and this is the only good pathway. They know that the vast majority of voters are not like you and I. They're not like us, right? They know that they're not heavily informed, that they're like how I was when I was gobbling up CNN, being like, I'm with her, I guess, like, oh, Trump wins. Oh my gosh, it's the worst thing in the world, right? Like, that's the average person. They have a regular life. They have a job that's not political. They've got family to take care of. They don't have time to sit here and think about all of this stuff. So they know that they're easy to manipulate, that they're easy to just say, look, orange man bad. And this Larry Elder is like, an orange man, right? That's what they're kind of like saying. They're like, Larry Elder is orange man bad reincarnated. And so if you go for this, then you're evil, you're terrible. And this is the only path forward. This is the way. So the media, I think, selecting Larry Elder, because that's what they did here in California. They essentially selected Larry Elder as the front runner against Gavin Newsom, even though there were literally 45 candidates on the ballot.
Wow.
Yeah, 45 candidates on the ballot. So they just selected Larry Elder, and they were basically like, this is the front runner. This is the one everybody's going for. And that, definitely he was popular, but I think had the media even looked at other candidates would have been really popular as well. Kevin Praffeth, who I ended up voting for, would have been, I think, really popular had voters known about him, right? But they didn't even breathe his name. So, they're extremely complicit in the demise of our democracy. I do believe that they are the number one threat. Media and social media are the number one threat to our democracy today, to the health of our democracy. We need choices, we need information, and they're not letting us have it. They're not letting us have the information to allow us to make choices. And then on top of it, when there are sketchy things that happen within the election itself, which happens, by the way, during the primary, my vote, I know, did not get counted for the primary, in the Democratic primary. They sent me the wrong ballot. And when I requested the right ballot, they didn't send it. And so I had to do a write-in on the wrong ballot, and they threw it away. That's how that worked.
Wow.
So, yeah. So they do sketchy stuff. Our envelopes had holes in them that could show whether or not you voted yes or no on the recall. This is the most stupid thing. It's like, why is there a hole in the envelope? That just so happens to be the exact size. The hole is the exact size as the whole, the dot that you fill in for your vote. So then you could see, like which way did you vote? And then you could, theoretically, I'm not accusing anybody of anything necessarily, but, you could theoretically see how somebody voted, and you could just, make those ballots maybe disappear. I don't know. Right. So it's real, but it's suspect. It makes people feel very suspect, whether or not there is something suspect going on or not. It makes us feel very suspect. And so, yeah, I don't trust the Democratic Party at all anymore. None, not any. I don't put anything past them. So any and all of these claims that have been out there circulating around that we're not allowed to talk about, I sit here and I think anything's possible. I think anything's possible. And so No, I don't think Larry Elder was going to win. I think once the media really kind of made it really like, okay, this is a choice between, it's a race between Larry Elder and Gavin Newsom rather than just, do you want to get rid of Gavin Newsom? I think the idea of getting rid of Gavin Newsom was very popular. I think the majority of Californians want him gone. But when they said, well, it's Gavin Newsom or Orange Man, then people were like, well, crap, I don't want Orange Man. I don't want Donald Trump 2.0 in California. And that's exactly how they painted Larry Elder. So they said, oh no, well then I guess we're stuck. We're stuck with the lesser of the two evils, and that is Gavin Newsom. And I think that's how he won. And it was like an amazing smear campaign against Larry Elder. Now, I don't agree with Larry Elder on a lot of things. I'm not a conservative, but I don't think he was a threat at all. I mean, we are a Democratic supermajority. So he could, what was he going to do? They were like, oh, he's going to overturn like Roe v. Wade in California. And it's like, for one, he doesn't even have the power to do that. And two, we have like Democrats run the place. Democrats run the joint. Like you can't have, a Republican won't be able to do anything. What he could have done is he could have put a stop to the mandates, right? He could have had executive order where he would have said no more mandates or something. People are then saying, well, he'll replace Dianne Feinstein and we'll lose our non-majority in the Senate, by the way, 50-50. So it's not a majority. They're like, oh, it will definitely be then, he'll give he'll appoint a Republican senator for Dianne Feinstein. I'm like, last I checked, Dianne Feinstein's still living and breathing. So it's kind of rude, right? For all these people to be like talking about her like untimely demise, right? and then secondly, and they're like, well, what if she retires? And I'm like, if Larry Elder is the governor of California, she wouldn't, obviously, right? She would stick around. And third, it's her own fault for running for a 6-year Senate term at the age of like 83 years old. I mean, what was she thinking? What was she thinking? I mean, talk about rude, to the Californian people. She should have not run when she hit that number, knowing that she'd be pushing 90 by the time she exited office. That was totally irresponsible of Dianne Feinstein. I'm not going to blame Larry Elder for that. So, yeah, I mean, in the end, we're stuck with Newsom. And they did this like little, kind of virtue signaling mandate thing here in Los Angeles the day after he won. That is honestly meaningless. Because they're like, okay, you have to show your vaccine passport to get into any bars, nightclubs, wineries, and breweries, but restaurants are exempt. Well, every bar and like every winery and brewery serves food. They're all restaurants. Like here in LA, we don't have a bar culture of bars, like a neighborhood bar you just go to that's just a bar. Like every bar is a restaurant here for the most part. And nightclubs, like most of them shut down during the pandemic, didn't open back up. There are some that have opened back up, but again, they're, I doubt their bouncer is going to sit there and check. I mean, it's like the most useless, stupid, it's such a mess out here.
Oh my gosh. I'm curious because I know like California's blue. During the Democratic primaries between Biden and Bernie like heavily won California. And so then I have to ask myself, if someone like Bernie could win so large like in California, why are people in California still voting for these corporate establishment Democrats?
Yeah, well, they're because they're for one, Democrat loyalists. So, that's how it is out here. And then, yeah, they're not really more Bernie. I would say they're more, it's hard to describe. I think they're definitely not 2016 Bernie. They're definitely 2020 Bernie, which was different, right? Yeah. So they voted for Bernie, but only because Bernie changed his tune a bit on a lot of things. And that is really, so California's not, I mean, California's, it's hard to say, like, I don't want to use the word progressive, but I'll say, I just think that the progressives shifted in my mind. Personally, I think progressives changed and they actually went more into the establishment. The establishment said, okay, we can work with this. Like, we've got this progressive wing. They're kind of crazy. What can we do to like bring them in so that they can also be a part of the establishment but be like maybe the crazy part of the establishment, but still part of the establishment. And I think they did a pretty good job of that. I think they did a great job of bringing them into the establishment. And I think so California voters voting for Bernie were still voting for the establishment in their minds. And so Gavin Newsom's really not a whole big departure in their mind. They don't make the distinction like you and I do.
I have to ask, with everything going on in LA, and I know this is a problem across the country, this is not just a Los Angeles issue with the tent communities in the city.
Yeah.
This has increased over the years, and it's I've seen it everywhere. I know, like here in Boston, I think the only reason we don't have them is because it gets really cold here. I'm just gonna be honest with you.
Yeah.
But other than that, I've seen a lot of people like being kicked out of their apartments because their landlord sold the building to an investor and they're like, that's it. I'm not your landlord anymore. I'm going to make my money and you got to find somewhere else to live. Well, what some people don't understand is like here in Boston, that means you have to come up with 3 months worth rent to move into another apartment. And depending on what time of year that is, it can be difficult to find a place to live because most people here move in September because of all the colleges.
Right.
In reference to Los Angeles with the tent communities, how do you feel about, I know this is an issue. I know there are a lot of homeless people, but what do you feel could be done so that this isn't an issue to begin with? Like, how
Yeah.
can those people be helped?
So there's a couple of things that we have to separate when we're talking about homelessness, at least in Los Angeles, which I live in a heavily homeless area. So I have a lot of homeless friends that I've made over the years, walking my dog and hanging, and coming across the community, the tent communities, and making friends within those communities, and being there to help them when they needed it and whatnot. So as somebody who's been around it for nearly 7-8 years now, there is a misconception that I would say there's a difference between chronic homelessness and transient homelessness. So somebody that is having a hard time coming up with rent because they got evicted, that is like a temporary homeless situation. So those people don't go and live in these tent communities. That's not what happens to somebody in that situation. There are emergency, housing and shelter for people that are in that particular, or they'll live in their car for a bit. It's definitely not great. It's not a good situation by any means, but it is very different than what is going on with the expanding tent communities, the expansion of Skid Row, where I live in Venice, where we've got, the tent communities all over the place, and it's expanding into Santa Monica, and it's everywhere. That issue is a mental health and drug addiction issue, very specifically. So those people what we're seeing is, and the reason why these communities are expanding is because of skyrocketing rates of drug addiction and mental disorders. And so one thing we have to figure out is why. We know that the opioid crisis was eventually going to come home to roost big time, right? So they were pumping out those opioids all the time. We saw those addiction rates go up. But now we are seeing sort of the real, and I don't know how bad it's going to get. And I worry about that. I worry, I'm sure there are people that study this. At what point were more and more people addicted to opioids? Was it, let's say 5 years ago, it reached its peak, right? Where they saw a record number of opioids being distributed across the country, clearly to people that didn't really need it, but they were addicted. If that's the case, let's say the peak was 5 years ago. Maybe we haven't even reached our peak. That would be terrible. I hope we have. But let's just say it was 5 years ago. Well, it's going to take time before that opioid addict 5 years ago reaches rock bottom to where they're living in a tent, a community, right? So we're going to see an expansion of these communities. Let's say it takes 10, 15, I would say it probably takes an opioid addict 15 years before they reach that point, rock bottom. So from my experience with addicts, and I have a lot of experience with addicts, it would take that, I would say, like 10, 15 years. So if the peak was 5 years ago, we're going to see these communities expanding for the next 10 years, getting worse and worse, because those opioid, the addiction's going to, again, it's all going to eventually, really take hold, the ramifications of it. So that's the real issue. And that's the problem that they're having. They're having a difficult time solving that problem. These people, you cannot just give them a house. You can't just say, here you go, here's some apartments we should be doing that for sure. there definitely needs to be a building of facilities, putting these people in those facilities, putting them in these structures that are safe and have locks. And, even if they're small, it doesn't matter, but, it's got to be something safe and secure. But they've got to somehow give them treatment. And whether, from and a lot of the mental health disorders we're finding might come from, kids being given a lot of Adderall when they were when they were young, or we're seeing we know that we're seeing these effects in even just nursing homes. There's high rates right now of schizophrenia in nursing homes that are a lot of elderly people are being diagnosed with schizophrenia at alarming rates because of the years of giving them sedatives and other types of things to keep them under control in the nursing homes. So now it's causing mental health disorders, right? So same with kids. We don't know, they had developing brains, gave them some, antipsychotic drugs or whatever, and then they get older and they've got issues, and they end up in these tent communities. And so I don't know what they're going to do to fix that. And neither do they, clearly, because they just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It's, I haven't really put a lot of thought into it because it's not my job to think of, not necessarily to solve the problem, but I do know that I want them to solve it. I would like to learn ways of what they think they're going to do to solve it, how other cities have solved it. But, a lot of other cities have a slightly different, because if it is like Utah, for example, they didn't have a lot of this drug addiction and mental psychosis homelessness. What they were dealing with in Utah was a lot more of the temporary homelessness, sort of like chronic, I would say chronic homelessness, where it was somebody who would get an odd job for a little while and they'd work, and maybe they do probably suffer from some mental health problems, and they would be able to support themselves for a moment, but then they would go homeless, and then they would kind of do it all over again in this sort of chronic homelessness sort of situation. And they were able to solve that. But I think we're dealing with a different animal because we're dealing with way more drug addiction in our communities than I think the Utahns were dealing with in theirs. Because they were Utah is a really good example because they were able to eradicate homelessness. They put together a plan and said, in 10 years, we're getting rid of this. And they did. It was amazing. Wow. Yeah, they said, we're going to give everybody a house. I mean, they just said, we're giving all of them a house and a social worker. And they said, we're going to put all of our money into this. We're talking a Republican state. And they just said, we're better off, giving them a little home, like an apartment, and giving them a social worker to help them work. So the social worker can assess what their personal issue is. And then we work with them on that. Is it that they can't read and they never learned to read? And so they can't work, right? So they have that hard time. Is it because of alcohol abuse? Is it because of mental health disorder? And they were able to largely, I think the problem's gotten worse though over the years because of opioids in Utah. So I think they no longer have it under control anymore, but better than other states.
That's really interesting because it kind of reminds me what Dr. Wolf was talking about with France. He was like, they're guaranteed housing and they get a social worker. And I'm like, what? I'm like, that is amazing. Imagine if we did that here in the US.
Yeah. But the problem is with California is like what you said, you don't have homelessness where you are as much because it's cold. So what happens is a lot of communities stick them on buses and send them our way. And so they get sent here. Austin, Texas had this very issue because the mayor of Austin said, well, okay, you need to be humane to your homeless people. And if you don't want them, bring them here. Well, they did. They put them on buses and sent them to Austin, Texas. And guess what? Now Austin, Texas downtown is filled with tents. It's a huge problem. And so, only a few cities in the country are absorbing the problem for the entire nation. And so there needs to be, so the problem is, it's like, how do you then talk like San Antonio, Texas, that shipped their homeless into Austin? How do you talk that city into building shelters and providing social workers for the homeless that they shipped off to Austin? Right. Yep. Same thing with, Boston, where you are, do they ship, if they stick people on buses and they say, we're going to send you down to Florida, where it's warm or something, are they also shipping social workers with them? So these certain communities are absorbing the entire problem for the entire country and and are stuck with the burden of trying to help with limited resources, limited money, and it really does need to be corrected at the federal level. And right now it's been doing it, they're doing it on like a city by city, municipality by municipality issue. It's like up to the cities to deal with. Well, it really shouldn't be. It needs to be up to the federal government because cities are burdening other cities. They're like, oh, well, send them that way. Santa Monica does it. Santa Monica was like, you can't be homeless here. So they would put you on a bus and just ship you over a few blocks to Venice and be like, set up your tent over there.
One thing I noticed too, like during the pandemic, in reference to rental assistance, so they left this responsibility up to the states to
Yeah.
give people like rental assistance, and some of the cities didn't even send people their money
Right.
like on time, and so then you had people even further behind, like on their rent. And I want to get your opinion about the whole like eviction moratorium, because this to me, in my mind, when I thought about this, I said, okay, they are extending the eviction moratorium. I said, but that's not really going to help people, because if you're already behind on your rent, you owe back
Right.
rent. If you didn't have the money then, how are you
Yeah.
going to have it 2 months from now and then catch up and get ahead? I'm like,
Right.
especially if they don't have a job. So my whole
Yeah.
thing was, I was actually advocating when AOC and Cori Bush was protesting at the Capitol. I was advocating for them to say, no, just do rent cancellation so people don't have to worry about this. And they're not going to come up with that money. There's nowhere they're
Yeah.
going to have it. I felt like the ask that they had was too small. And then it was like, I felt like it was kind of performative. Like they did their little stint there and then they just walked away. And then the next
Yeah.
thing you know, the Supreme Court like overturns it. So sometimes I have to ask myself, like, what was it all for? And I
Yeah.
want to get your opinion about the squad and like their behavior recently, especially with the eviction moratorium and AOC voting present just the other day.
So I know I have a controversial viewpoint on this, so everybody buckle up. Here we go. I don't think it's an actual problem. I think that was a manufactured problem that the squad used for visibility or you know, whatever, like just for notoriety or to say, yeah, we're fighting for the people. And I'll explain why I don't think it's a real problem. Because you have to remember during the pandemic, what happened. So we all know that in the news media, they made it a big deal that some states were not they weren't locking down anymore. They were opening up their economies. They were saying people go back to work, everybody go back to normal, right? Those were the red states. So the red states all went back to normal. And I can attest they did. I'm from Idaho. I was flying back and forth between Idaho and California. And I can tell you Idaho was back to normal. In California, we were in lockdown. We weren't even allowed to have lunch outside. They closed down our restaurants for outdoor dining. I mean, it was crazy. Totally crazy. Wow. I was like, what was the science on that? You know, you couldn't even sit outside at a restaurant. I mean, they're like, nope, takeaway only. That's it. In Idaho, everything was open. And because it's winter, it's cold in Idaho, they don't do outdoor dining in the middle of December. So everything was open. I went to concerts in December in Idaho. Like it was totally normal there. Blue states were the ones that did the really strict lockdown measures. Mm-hmm. So when you look at it from this perspective, then you fast forward a few months. Now, everybody I know in Idaho, my friends and family there, no one lost their jobs in Idaho because they went back to work pretty much right away. They really didn't do a lockdown. So they had this really targeted, very small, like maybe like a couple of weeks or a month where they kind of did we're not going to open up bars and restaurants. So it did a lot of strain on the service industry, but it was very brief because Idaho opened back up, Texas opened back up, Florida opened back up. So the states that were the least likely to help people didn't need the help because nobody really lost. I mean, their economies weren't as devastated. They just went back to work and said, okay, everybody, you know, get out there. And people did. The states that went into the heaviest lockdowns were the blue states, the states most likely to actually help you if you were to run into this issue. And so here in California, for example, California has its own eviction standards that are beyond. So the federal government has nothing to do with evictions in California. The federal government can lift the eviction moratoriums all the government wants. Before there was ever an eviction moratorium by the federal government, California already had one. All the liberal states pretty much did. So the liberal states were looking at it from like, okay, we've locked down. Now we can't let people get kicked out. And then the liberal states started to say, okay, we're going to have these. Now we've got the federal money to assist with the rent. And so they did actually start to, and I know that they haven't totally distributed the money, but you cannot evict in the state of California, for example, for this back rent. You just can't. You can evict for other reasons. So the eviction moratorium that the federal government lifted allowed for Californian landlords to now evict for actual behavior that needed to be evicted. People need to be evicted for, but they still can't evict for lack of not receiving back rent. They can evict, however, if that person didn't meet the state's guidelines, which was like, I think as of July, everybody had to start paying like a percentage of their rent, a real small percentage. So I know for people, it was like 20% or something of the rent, that not the back rent that they owed, of their actual just rent bill going forward. Okay. And that the state then said, we'll deal with the back rent. But for now, in order to avoid being evicted, what you need to do is you need to pay 20% of what your actual monthly rent is. Okay. So then now the state says to the landlords, okay, you forgive 20% total or 30% total of the back rent owed, and we'll pay you the rest. And a lot of people are applying for it and they're being given that. I haven't heard of a single instance yet of somebody being denied that. Not a single instance of it. And I have friends in every part of Los Angeles, in every sort of neighborhood. So, and all of them are saying that they're not hearing within their neighborhoods or their friends any sort of real true eviction crisis going on. The real crisis has been for people that really, I mean, I don't want to say the real crisis, but a crisis is that there are people that absolutely need to be evicted that they weren't allowed to be evicted and they desperately needed to be evicted for a variety of different reasons. And we have those situations that happen. They're dangerous. They're, whatever it might be. So I don't think it's a real crisis. I'm not actually, I hear these numbers, but I'm like, look, if it were a real crisis, don't you think CNN would be all over this? Don't you think they'd be like interviewing a load of people, like families? And, they have these like one-off stories that they kind of give you, but you're not hearing like, it's not like here in LA, the LA Times isn't like saying, oh my gosh, all these people are ending up homeless from this scenario. It's just not happening. If they can apply for the money, they're getting it because there's way more money out there than there are people needing it. I mean, that's the reality. They didn't run out. They've barely used any of it. I think the actual amount, what was it, like 43 billion given, and they've only used a couple billion of that amount. So there's still, they're not running out of cash. There's plenty of it out there. And like I said, the red states opened up. They just didn't have this same sort of issue. There are all, and eviction is something that happens all the time. So we're, of course, going to hear stories, whether there's pandemic or no pandemic, evictions happen. And a lot of them are unjust, but a lot of them aren't totally unjust either. So it's kind of this, sort of situation. And people can always, they can try to fight. I mean, it's like impossible to fight an eviction in a place like Texas, for example, but it's like pretty easy to fight an eviction in California. It's really hard to get evicted in a liberal state. It's really easy though to get evicted in a red state. They'll just throw you out and lock the door. They'll put a padlock on
it. So do you feel like because I did kind of feel like when they were at the Capitol, I felt like it was performative.
Yeah.
I was like, if this is a real protest, where's everybody else? Why did you wait until Congress went home for recess? It just didn't make any sense to me.
That's why I'm saying I don't think it's a real actual crisis. Of course, there are people being evicted because there are always people being evicted all the time, every year, pandemic, no pandemic. That happens. And it's going to continue to happen. Landlords absolutely need to have the right to evict people. It's crazy to think otherwise. It's actually totally against, you have to be able to, like, if somebody's destroying your place or committing crimes or whatever it might be, you've got to be able to get, or not paying rent, you have to be able to say you got to go. But I just don't think it's an actual real, I think it's like a manufactured crisis to make people be like, oh my gosh, and then it's like, oh, don't you think the media would be all over it if these red states were evicting people? Like they'd be like, oh my gosh, look at what this governor in Texas, Governor Abbott, look what he's doing. All these people are being evicted, all these nice families from their homes because they couldn't afford their rent during the pandemic. It's like, they would be all over that. The Squad would be showing all those videos, but it's just, instead they show up to the Capitol. It's like this, sort of, like you said, sort of performative thing. And then the crisis, and then they're not talking about it anymore. And I'm telling you, it's because I don't think it's an actual real crisis. I think we have bigger fish to fry.
Mm.
But
I
I know
want
maybe
to
people don't like that.
get I want to get your opinion about third parties because I personally, and those of us at FHL, we are, like you, like I'm done with Democrats. I talk about that often, like on my show. I just feel like I think for me, the squad was the biggest disappointment. After Obama, the squad was the biggest disappointment for me
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I was expecting them to go into office and really push back and really like fight against the establishment. And so when they vote on legislation where they could vote as a block and actually make a difference, and
Hmm.
they choose to not do that, they choose to go with what Nancy Pelosi tells them to do, it's just disappointing. And I've seen it happen 3 times now, probably could have been more than that, but 3 that I remember. And so for me, I tell people, like, I feel like if you're going to vote third party. I don't think there's any shame in that. And I saw people shaming people when Trump ran against Hillary. People were
Right.
shaming like third party voters and things like
Right.
that.
Those of us who voted for Jill Stein.
Exactly. I mean, I felt like Jill Stein was a better candidate than either one of them.
Yeah, for sure.
But I want to get your opinion about third parties. Like, do you feel this is the direction people should go in? Because I know there's Movement for a People's Party. I know, there's the Green Party. I think the Green Party needs help with advertising and marketing, in my
Yeah.
opinion. And now Andrew Yang is starting a third party. So I want to get your opinion about that.
Well, our government is not designed for a third party. So unfortunately, there's no real way to actually have a third party emerge in this country. What we can have is a third party emerge to the point where it replaces one of the other two parties. But we are a
Mhm.
two-party system just by virtue of the way our political system is laid out, the electoral college, which is like a winner take all system but you actually have to get to that 50% mark of all. It wouldn't actually, or maybe it's not a winner take all system. It's you have to get to that no matter what, you have to get to that over 50% mark, even if there's, let's say, 6 parties. So it's plus you've got, in order for ballot access to happen, you've got to have each of the state legislatures vote for that. Legislatures are dominated by Republicans and Democrats who don't really have any motivation to change ballot access to allow for real strong third parties to come about. I mean, we've got a lot of issues. So I think that the benefit of a third party rising up is if it truly is going to replace or what I think happens with third parties is that they do a really good job of pushing a party toward a certain, in a certain direction. And I do think that, there's been some progress on that front when so the Democratic Party will adopt a couple of platform points from a third party that are popular in order to bring them into the fold. It's kind of like what we're talking about with the squad, how disappointing they are because they say, okay, we'll adopt a couple of your narratives, but not ones that are actually going to make any real fundamental change to anything. But the ones that really fire people up, that get people really emotional, because that's the way you control a voting base, is just make them mad, like keep them emotional. So as long as, so if you're emotional about a subject, if you're really, yeah, that's how they trap you. They trap you over the emotion. So they adopt a couple of the things and they say, okay, yeah, we'll put this in here and now we'll gain all those people because again, it's like better to have us than this other bad, terrible person. So I would love to have a third party rise up in this country. I was actually writing a book on starting a third party in America. But as I was writing the book, I was researching and realized it's really impossible. It's literally impossible. It
I
has to
think we would
replace.
I think we would need to have ranked choice voting to
Yeah,
go
but
along with it.
like I said, ballot access would have to, the state legislatures or even the municipalities would have to change that. That ends up being like a Swiss cheese approach, right? Because you've got like this area that does it, but this area that won't, and this area that does, and this, so it ends up not being like uniform across the country. And so in the end, you end up with everybody just kind of going back into the fold of two parties, especially for federal elections. So it would
How do
have
you
to be like a fundamental change. But again, our politics are controlled by the two parties that don't want to share power. So they're not really motivated to make those changes.
How do you feel about Nina Turner's campaign? Because I I felt like I should have been more excited when Nina announced that she was running, and I felt like I didn't have a lot of that excitement because I was disappointed with the squad. So
Yeah.
there was that. And so that's kind of on me. So I don't want to put that on her campaign, but I do feel like I for me, I felt like there wasn't a strong ground game. And I felt like the reason why people like AOC and Cori Bush won is because they were able to bring out non-voters. I felt like with Nina Turner election, like that did not happen. And so that tells me that the ground game was not strong. And so when I hear people say that people like me, that we're the reason that Nina Turner lost, even though I don't even live in Ohio, so I
Right.
couldn't have voted anyway, because we're telling people, that we're not happy with the squad. And we're telling people that like we need to fight for these issues. And a lot of us are activists and we're going out and we are protesting and we are marching. And so it was rather disappointing to see during the same weekend that we had all the Medicare for All marches. It was disappointing to see that Nina Turner and them, like, they didn't even tweet about it. Yeah, if you couldn't attend it, okay, I understand, but they didn't even talk about it. And I know she was asked to be a part of it. And it was a disappointment. So it seemed like the same people that they told us all these years go out and fight for these issues, we were the ones that were ignored. All of a sudden, those issues were ignored. I want to hear your opinion, how you felt about her campaign, because I actually got a little suspicious when I saw that Bakari Sellers was connected to her campaign. When I saw that, I was like, not Jeff Weavers again, really, out of all the people. So I just felt like for someone coming from Bernie's campaign, I was expecting her to run a more progressive campaign. And I felt like she was moving further and further towards the center. And in my opinion, I feel like that's why she didn't win. I could be wrong, but I wanted to get your opinion on that as well.
So the squad has a real image problem. And I don't think we're going to see any more wins for anyone who affiliates with the squad for a really long time. I think that there was a moment, and that moment is passing pretty quickly.
Mhm.
And I actually don't even think that when you actually assess the wins that have happened, I don't even in the 2020 election in particular, I don't think that any of them had to do with the actual messaging, like progressive messaging. I think that this has been like the moment for like Black women and men, quite frankly. And so I think that what happened in a lot of the elections around the countries, you saw that, we even saw this with like the mayor, New York mayor race, right? Like, who is it?
Mhm.
That's Andrew. No, Yang is going up again. Eric, right? Who is it? The guy that's in, I keep forgetting that, for the mayor of New York City. We're seeing this all around. So the idea, what I found in the elections that were happening, was this idea that it was the progressive squad messaging. I wasn't seeing that actually being the common thread for all the wins. I was
Mhm.
actually seeing a rise in members of the Black community winning elections. As the country was signaling like, hey, right, especially after Black Lives Matter, like, this is the way we want more Black voices representing people in Congress. And so Nina Turner, you've got two Black women going against each other, and
Mhm.
one of them has got the squad. And I think the squad has a serious messaging problem that I don't think is actually the reason why the squad has expanded in a lot of ways. So when you take those two women and you put them up against each other, and one of them is essentially being affiliated with the squad, and oh no, we're going to get another member of the squad, it turns regular people off a lot. They don't like the squad. They're, because for one, they don't understand a lot of the real more measured members, like, I don't even know if they're considered members of the squad. I don't even know who's in the squad really anymore, because I know it's like kind of shifted. But like, I think like Pramila Jayapal, for example, is not like the others, right? In her messaging, in her focus, she's very, very focused on Medicare for all, and she's been very focused on the reconciliation package and whatnot. And so I think there are definitely members that if they were the more prominent ones to represent what the progressive movement is about, that it would be way more popular. But the problem is just like any movement, if you take the person that is the most fringe, seemingly fringe, like AOC and Ilhan Omar feel to the regular public like radicals, you know, they don't want it. They're like, I don't know, that's just too radical for me. Like, I want somebody a little bit. And so they end up with these like total moderates because in their mind, they were associated. I just think that's really, I think a lot of it for Nina Turner was that she just it was like guilt by association for the voters. And as much as online viewers, like YouTube viewers, we might be like all about these super progressive, depends on, that's kind of shifted. The term has shifted. I don't consider myself a progressive anymore because the term has shifted quite a bit for me.
Yep.
But, whatever. So I think that people even though they actually do find many of the policies very, very popular, a lot of the other rhetoric they're not feeling so good about. And so they're worried about it. And so I just think a lot of it maybe had to do with that, because I do think Nina actually ran a pretty good campaign. I'm sure that they had some things that they had to work on. And I also do think that you're right. She did seem to, I think all of the progressives, I don't think you can really even fault her, have all kind of moved a little bit towards the establishment. But that's because they know they have an image problem. And so now they're trying to like maintain their seats because they are at risk of being voted out, I think, because of their image problem. But that's not something that the average, that's something that people that are like highly educated online don't fully understand, because unless you're understanding the mentality of just the average person that's just, living their daily life, they're all very turned off by anybody who seems. But the problem is that a lot of the messages that they have, these two extremes are actually quite popular, but they just get guilt by association. Like, no, we don't want that because that extreme person wants that.
I want to get your opinion about Joe Biden, about his administration and how he's doing, because I keep telling people I think we're going to see a red wave come through, because I haven't seen Joe Biden fulfill any of his promises that he ran on. And he's being very arrogant about it. He's saying, like, if Medicare for All bill comes my way, I'm going to veto it. I'm not going to do these things. And it's just kind of smug and arrogant. How do you feel about the Biden administration, and what do you think is going to happen 2024, but also 2022 when it comes to the House and Senate elections as well?
Well, I don't think Joe Biden's really the president of the United States right now. I don't know who is. I would like to find out, I would love to know who like they are that he kind of refers to when he's sitting there and he says, oh, they don't want me answering questions. They say I gotta go. Like, who's the real president, Joe? Can we meet him? So as far as he goes, I just think he's literally a puppet for whoever it is, for the establishment that's running the show behind the scenes. I don't know. I think they're going to have to run him. I actually really thought that they would. And I do think their initial plan was to replace him with Kamala after like 3 years. And maybe they still will. Yeah. I think that their plan is, okay, we'll take Kamala at least 2 years into Joe Biden's term, and then we'll put her as president. He'll have to retire or something because he's not feeling well or something happens or something. But she's so unpopular that I don't know. I think they now know, because they kind of were, they continue to, they just give us people. That's why I don't think we're in a real democracy anymore, because we just end up with these people that we didn't even really vote for. And so I think they kept trying to push her on us. They tried throughout the primary. She didn't get anywhere. They've now tried it with her being vice president. I mean, it's just such a sham, right? And so the voters still, no matter what, are not taking to her, no matter how hard they've tried. They've called it the Biden-Harris administration. Did Obama ever call it the Obama-Biden administration? Was that like ever a thing?
I don't remember that. I don't remember him saying
Pretty sure
that.
it never was said. I'm pretty sure. Like, it was never like the Bush-Cheney administration, or, it's like, it was never said like that. It was always the Bush administration, the Obama administration, but now it's the Biden-Harris administration. Well, why is that? Because they've been trying to groom our minds into being like the Harris administration over and over and over again. And so they want to insert her in, but she's so unpopular. There's no way they're going to pull this off. So I actually wonder if they're going to get rid of her somehow and replace her with Pete Buttigieg, who's their other guy that they want. But I think he's also really unpopular. So I don't know how they're going to, they just keep giving us unpopular person after unpopular person after unpopular person. And they're wondering why they're like, why people don't trust the elections, right? Yep. like why people are sitting there going, I don't know, man. Something doesn't smell right. because they keep giving us crap. So of course it would smell like, so I think that there's a big, I think the thinking is on Capitol Hill that the Democrats are going to lose the House and the Senate, that they're just, as much as they've tried to manufacture consent or like manufacture even just like, yeah, oh yeah, this is what everybody wants. I just don't think that their like mandates, their heavy hand with the pandemic. I actually don't think that the majority of Americans do really want that. And so I think they know it. And there's potentially going to be a shakeup, during the midterms. So we'll see how that goes. And then I don't know what's going to happen for the presidential election, because I don't know if Joe is going to be, I mean, he's clearly fading now mentally. So I don't know how he's going to hold up in the next few years to run against whoever the Republicans put up. And it might be Trump again. And if it's Kamala going against Trump, that's it. There's no way she wins. And if she does, then we all really will be feeling pretty suspect about the health of our democracy in this country.
Oh my gosh, I agree. One more question for you.
Yeah.
Given the state of the political environment that we have in this country, again, like I think more and more people are starting to say to me, even people that were like, yes, we need Biden, they're starting to say to me that like, yeah, I'm not really liking Joe Biden. I don't feel like he's really doing anything like really to help people, or my life isn't any better under Joe Biden than it was under Trump. Given that impression, and given that it just came out recently that more independents, well, we're increasing independence in this country.
Right.
That's
I'm one of them. I've increased to independent for sure.
Same here. And then the other side of that is that Joe Biden is losing independence in this country right now. He's polling very low with them right now as of this month. I feel like independents were the ones that got him elected in Arizona, maybe Georgia, not quite sure. But that being said, how do you think voter turnout is going to be come 2024?
Well, it really depends on who the Republicans run. I don't think people are going to really be all that enthusiastic about voting for Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, if she's the one that they put up, or Pete Buttigieg, or whoever they give us, whichever candidate they say, this is who you get, whether you like it or not. I don't know. I really don't know how. I think you're right, though. I think that the independents are growing in this country because we're feeling like the camps that we identified with have moved more, I think further extreme, right? So like for me, I always considered myself a progressive, but I am a Swedish style progressive. I just want Sweden I just want to live in Sweden, except I don't want all that cold. And but I'm just a huge fan of Sweden. I just think it's like the best government. I think they handled everything the best way. I think that they're like the most transparent democracy. They're the most, they have no corruption really in their government, and and all of their people are cared for. And because of it, they're all beautiful because they all get health care, and they don't have to worry about who's going to watch their kid. And, they've got everything from cradle to grave. They've got Medicare for all, essentially, education for all, childcare for all, elderly care for all. It's just a really well-run society. And that is the type of economy I've always wanted and advocate and still advocate for this country. However, like what has happened is, now the marker is, well, if you can't be a progressive unless you also go for now, not just those things, the economic stuff, but you also have to go for maybe even more economic things that are even more extreme, that are even, added on social things and added on, it's like, if you're going to be now a progressive, you have to have all this. And the same thing for the right. Right. It's like they feel like, OK, you could be a populist anti-establishment, but now it's like, now you've got to be like a QAnon Trump supporter or something. Like you got to go far out there, right, in order to be considered one of them or else. And so then what's happened is even all these like real anti-establishment populist people on the right that voted for Trump and they liked Trump, as the Trump supporting base went more and more fringe on them, they started to go, I got to distance myself from that. And then they're like, I don't even know what I am anymore. And that's how I feel as a progressive. I'm like, I don't even know what I am anymore, because I certainly am not like, I'm not a communist. I'm not that's not something that I advocate for or want to live under. So, and I do think that there are a lot that have gone in that direction, right? So not a lot, but enough to like, I think kind of sully the like reputation a bit, which is unfortunate. Same thing with the Trump side. It's like the QAnoners like make it weird. So a lot of us have gone more independent. And I think you're right. Like the independent minded people probably did get Joe Biden elected, and probably, but also are probably really worried about Joe Biden now.
Mm-hmm.
And so who knows, man? I mean, it's like anybody's guess right now, because we don't know who the Republican candidate is. But I think it would be a real mistake for Republicans to put Trump back up there. Just because I just think that there's so many forces against Trump, not just voters that hate him, but I think there's like deep state forces against the guy. And so I just don't think they'll ever let him be president ever again, no matter what. I mean, I really think we all probably could vote for the guy and they would still say he lost. They'd be like, no way, we're going to somehow disqualify this guy. I mean, they've tried over and over and over again. So I just don't think there's any way that guy's going to be it. But I also don't think Ron DeSantis is going to run. Maybe he will. If he did, I think he'd be really popular. And I think that would be a real formidable candidate. And I actually think he would win the president.
Wow.
Yeah. If he were to, but the Floridians don't want him to go. They're like, no, stay in Florida. Because we're afraid. They're like, well, who are you going to leave us with? And then what? So they really love Ron DeSantis. I mean, I was there I spoke at a Palestinian convention in July, for July 4th, or July 3rd, I was speaking at a Palestinian event, and many of them are in Jacksonville, Florida, and many of them are Democrat or liberal, and even they love Ron DeSantis. I mean, it was like, oh yeah, everybody. I mean, you go to Florida, and you don't listen to what any of the mainstream media tells you about him. Everybody in Florida loves the guy. Yeah, he is really, even a lot of progressives, like when Ron DeSantis won, there were a lot of progressives I talked to that live in Florida that were like, the guy's not so bad. He did start a climate action committee. He did, go to the legislature and say, hey, the Floridians voted to decriminalize marijuana and you guys need to do it, because they voted for it. So you guys need to stop holding it up. Like he really, he doesn't have the downsides of Trump. Like you can't call him a climate change denier. You certainly can't do that with Ron DeSantis. And you can't call, he doesn't have scandals, but he has all the benefits of Trump, right? So he's got that takes down the media, calls out the establishment. So I think he's probably going to be president if I had to make a guess.
Well, you heard it here, folks. You heard it here first, guys. You heard it here first.
We'll the DeSantis administration. Yeah, right. I don't know if it'll be 2024 or if he'll go for 2028. I think he might. It's kind of one of those things when you're a politician, do you strike while the iron's hot and you go for it, or do you wait it out? And because for him, it's like unfortunate timing, right? Because 2024, Joe Biden would be the incumbent and he'd be able to run again. And it's really tough to defeat an incumbent. But then, Ron DeSantis has to kind of gamble and say, well, in 6 years, how popular is he going to be? Is something going to come up and he's going to lose his popularity? Because that stuff is like so flippant, right? Like one wrong move, one wrong tweet. and you're done.
That's all it takes. You have one question from Dustin. Can you describe your research process? How do you evaluate your overall narrative? Your reports and commentary are very impressive, and you seem to get the best take way before others. Thanks so much, Dustin.
Oh, thank you. My research process. So one thing that I do, I don't know if I have like really a process. It's kind of like mad scientist sort of. I feel like it's like all over the place. I just have a thought and I start to go down that road with it. And then maybe I read something about a subject and then that sparks another thought. And then I kind of go down that road with it. What I can say though, is that I do use like a VPN so that I mask my IP address. This is important. I put myself in a foreign country. I typically put myself in like Sweden, or I'll throw myself in India, or I'll put myself in Brazil. There's like a few countries around the globe where I'll throw my my IP address. The reason I do that is because you get different search results when you Google from a foreign country. And then I don't use Google, I use DuckDuckGo. And that gives you a whole different, that gives you an entirely different set of, like, when you search the same phrase, you get something completely different from there. I do use Google because I will go to, I often regularly, especially when I'm researching something like the pandemic in Sweden, for example, and how they're handling it. And I want to get, and I hear American news saying, "Oh, it's a disaster. It's terrible. Look what's going on in Sweden. Oh my gosh, we don't want to be Sweden. It's horrible," right? So I don't listen to any of that because that's garbage. What I do is I'll go to the Swedish news sites, and I will load them up from, I'll put the VPN in Sweden, and I will load up Swedish news sites, and I will go to Google Translate. I will type in, like pandemic, and then have it translate to Swedish, so that I could use that word in Swedish and Google that, because then that'll actually pop up websites in Swedish language. And then I actually would use Google Translate and translate that page into English, so that I can read what the actual Swedish news says, which is entirely different than what we got, the narrative we got here in the United States, which was like, wow, this is so bad. In Sweden, they were all like pretty happy with it. It was like nothing. It was a non-topic. They're like, yeah, this is what we're doing. Of course, obviously, like for them, it wasn't even they were like, I mean, of course, they're isolated away from the rest of the world. But whenever they would hear about how the rest of the world was reacting about their response to the pandemic, they were like, I don't know, anyway. So, but I try to do that in every language. India, for India, I do that in Portuguese. I do that in like China, like any. So that is part of the research process. It's just getting that, I think, worldview perspective, getting it from rather than just consuming our media, which is just propaganda. It's really important to go outside of that. It's also really, really important whenever you hear something that is particularly enraging, you always have to take a step back, always, no matter what you feel like you're enraged about, and then say, okay, this might really upset me, but where can I look to find out what the reality is of this situation? Where can I go to find out the truth of this? I just say treat everything as being very suspect. And I'm just very suspicious of everything. So that way I don't take anything at face value. I'm like, really though? But maybe not, and then I double check if I read something from some source and it might be something I like. And I'm like, ooh, yeah, but then I have to double check that, because I don't want to just trust what some source says just because I happen to like what they say. I need to double check that as well. So I think it's just really important. It takes me, for example, when I write the radars, a daily radar takes 6 to 7 hours of my day just for that one piece.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really intense. Sometimes multiple days. But yeah, I've always researched I could be a private investigator. I really could. I like find anything on the internet and anybody. I know where everybody lives. I can find out. I can find out everything about you from the internet. But that's because, you just got to know the keywords to put in there and all that. I know it's hard. People always ask me this question. I don't have any way to answer it because I'm like a spaz when it comes to research. There's no method to my madness. It's just madness.
I'll have to check out DuckDuckGo. I've never used that before.
It's way better. I mean, there's now Google is great on a lot of things, like the translate aspect. Google is really great because, when you search for something, especially a statistic, or like for the COVID pandemic, I follow a lot of that. So Google is the best resource when I want to find out like how the pandemic is going in Singapore. Right now, things are crazy in Singapore. So I go to Google and I Google Singapore COVID. I wouldn't go to DuckDuckGo and do that because I'm not going to get, I do that as well, but I'm not going to get the actual graphs, the actual stats. Like Google's really good at providing like stats and graphs. And plus Google has, they just have, because they're more robust, but I switch back and forth between the two search engines. But DuckDuckGo is my default search engine.
Cool. All right, Kim. Well, thanks so much for coming on. But before you go, where can everyone find you?
Well, I have the Kim Iverson show, here on YouTube on YouTube. I don't know where we are right now, but it's on YouTube, and it's on Rockfin, and it's on YouTube and Rockfin. Where else is it? I'm also on Locals. So I have a Locals community there, and then also, of course, I'm on Hills Rising, doing radar segments every day. So you could check those out, and I put all of those radar segments on my YouTube playlist, so it's easy for people to find. My daily radar. They just go to my channel and see it right there. So that's how.
Awesome. Kim, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
All right, guys, you know how we do this. I know it's Friday. I know it's not as late as it usually is. Maybe I'll come back later on tonight, but I do have to eat at some point. But have a good night. Keep up the fight.